Julia Benson never suspected that her quiet husband, Aaron, and the man she trusted most, Pastor Michael Crane, were hiding a secret that would destroy her life. Until the day she caught them in an unimaginable act, and 2 days later, her body was found floating lifeless in the pool. It was a warm Sunday morning in Fairview, Texas, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's names, secrets, and history. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and church bells echoed through the air, calling families out of their homes and into Grace Fellowship Church. Pastor Michael Crane stood at the pulpit that morning, dressed in his crisp black suit, his voice calm and measured as he spoke about forgiveness and faith. The congregation hung on every word, believing he was a man touched by God. No one in that church, not even those who loved him most, could have guessed how dark the truth behind his gentle smile truly was. Julia Benson sat in the second pew, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was known around town as a kind and elegant woman, always the first to volunteer, the first to comfort, the first to forgive. Her husband, Aaron Benson, sat beside her, head bowed but expressionless. Their marriage looked perfect from the outside, a picture of quiet devotion and stability. But Julia had begun to sense that something had shifted in the months before. Aaron had become distant, his phone always face down, his church attendance sporadic, and his eyes carrying a weight she couldn't explain. Pastor Michael often reached out to her, offering advice and prayer. He'd been the one to help her and Aaron through previous struggles, and she trusted him completely. He was not just a spiritual guide to her, he was a friend. But there was something odd in the way he avoided her eyes that morning, as if he carried a guilt too heavy to look her in the face. Julia noticed, but she brushed it off, believing her mind was playing tricks on her. That afternoon, Julia drove to visit her sister 2 towns over. It was meant to be a quick trip, a few hours of catching up before returning home to prepare dinner. When she left Fairview, she felt a strange unease she couldn't name, as though something was waiting for her on the other side of that drive. The sun dipped low by the time she pulled back into her neighborhood. She parked in the driveway and noticed her front door slightly ajar, swinging faintly with the evening breeze. Her heart began to race. At first, she thought Aaron had simply forgotten to close it properly, but as she stepped inside, a strange silence filled the air. The house was dimly lit, the faint smell of wine and cologne lingering in the air. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she walked toward the bedroom. A low noise, something between a sigh and a gasp, escaped from inside. She pushed the door open slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The scene before her was something she could never have imagined in her worst nightmare. Pastor Michael was kneeling on the floor, his shirt half unbuttoned, his hands trembling. Standing before him, completely naked, was Aaron. The two froze like statues, horror written across their faces as Julia's mind tried to make sense of what she was seeing. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply turned and walked out, her entire world shattering in silence. That night, she didn't answer her phone, didn't speak to anyone. She deleted her church group chats, blocked both men's numbers, and sat on her porch until sunrise, watching the sky turn pale. By morning, the small town of Fairview would already be buzzing with whispers of something scandalous, though no one yet knew the full truth. In 2 days, the name Julia Benson would no longer be spoken in present tense, and the quiet calm of Fairview would never return again. The morning Julia Benson's body was found, the quiet neighborhood of Maple Ridge Lane filled with sirens and murmurs. It was just after sunrise when her next-door neighbor, an elderly woman named Marlene Cooper, noticed something floating in the backyard pool next door. At first, she thought it was one of those inflatable garden covers blown into the water overnight. But as she walked closer, her heart froze. The pale outline of a human figure, still and lifeless, drifted beneath the clear blue surface. Marlene screamed, and within minutes, police cars and an ambulance swarmed the once peaceful street. Julia was discovered face down in the water, her long brown hair spread out like a dark halo, her white nightgown clinging to her body. It looked almost peaceful at first glance, too peaceful for the horror that it was. The scene felt staged, unnatural. The gate to the backyard wasn't broken, the patio furniture undisturbed, and her jewelry, phone, and wallet were still neatly arranged on the table. Nothing appeared stolen. There was no forced entry, no visible injuries, no blood. To the untrained eye, it looked like an accidental drowning or a tragic moment of despair. But to Detective Carla Mendez, who arrived shortly after, something about it felt wrong from the very beginning. The detective stood at the pool's edge, studying every inch of the area. She noticed that Julia's sandals were lined up perfectly by the pool ladder, her robe folded neatly on the chair. It seemed too organized, as if someone wanted it to appear like she had decided to slip quietly into the water and never come back. But Julia's recent social media posts told a different story. The night before, she had posted a photo of candles lit in her kitchen with the caption, "Fresh starts are never easy, but they're worth it." That wasn't the post of a woman preparing to end her life. It was the post of someone determined to begin again. The coroner's early report confirmed what Detective Mendez suspected. Julia hadn't drowned because she wanted to. There were traces of sleeping medication in her system, enough to make her unconscious but not enough to kill her. That meant she was drugged before she entered the water. Someone wanted her helpless. Someone wanted her quiet. Aaron Benson arrived at the scene not long after the discovery. His reaction seemed strange. He was crying, yes, but his face lacked the shock one might expect from a man who had just lost his wife. He kept repeating that he didn't know what happened, that Julia must have gone outside during the night. When police asked where he'd been, he claimed to have fallen asleep on the couch, unaware of anything until the neighbors started knocking on the door. His story was simple, maybe too simple. By midday, the story had spread through the entire town. People gathered outside the church, whispering to each other, questioning how something like this could happen to someone like Julia. The pastor's sermon that evening felt hollow and uneasy. Michael Crane spoke about loss, about trusting God's plan, but his hands shook as he held the microphone. He avoided Aaron's eyes completely. Detective Mendez spent the following hours combing through Julia's house. In her bedroom, she found a half-empty bottle of wine and an untouched glass. On the nightstand sat a small bottle of sleeping pills prescribed to Aaron, not Julia. Every detail seemed to tie back to that house and the two men she had once trusted the most. That evening, under the fading orange sky, the detective stood again beside the pool, her reflection rippling next to Julia's ghostly memory. Something sinister had happened here. And while everyone in Fairview whispered theories about heartbreak and suicide, Detective Mendez was sure of one thing. Julia Benson's death wasn't an accident. It was a message, and whoever sent it was still out there, watching closely, waiting to see if anyone would dare uncover the truth. Detective Carla Mendez began reconstructing Julia Benson's final hours with a sharp eye for the smallest details. She believed that the truth was always hidden in what people overlooked. The receipts, the call logs, the quiet moments before everything fell apart. Julia's phone records showed activity until nearly 10 that night. There were 3 missed calls from an unsaved number, 1 outgoing call to her best friend, and a text draft that was never sent. The draft message contained only 9 words that made the detective's pulse quicken. If anything happens to me, look at them both. It was enough to turn what appeared to be a suicide into a full-blown homicide investigation. The them was obvious. Aaron Benson and Pastor Michael Crane. 2 men tied not only to Julia's death, but to each other in ways no one yet fully understood. Detective Mendez started with Aaron. When she arrived at his home, she noticed the blinds were drawn, and his voice was low, shaky, rehearsed. His account of the night didn't add up. He said Julia had been quiet all evening and went to bed early while he watched television. He claimed he fell asleep on the couch around 10 and didn't wake up until dawn. But a closer look at the couch cushions revealed they were untouched, perfectly aligned, and the blanket folded neatly. The man who claimed to have spent the night there clearly hadn't. The kitchen sink told another story. There were 2 glasses on the counter, one with fingerprints belonging to Julia, and one belonging to Aaron. The faint residue of wine lingered inside both. Toxicology would later confirm that only Julia's glass contained traces of the sleeping medication. The question was, who poured it? When asked about the tension in their marriage, Aaron hesitated, saying they had differences. He never explained further, but neighbors recalled hearing muffled arguments from their home 2 nights before Julia's death, the kind that made even the walls feel tense. Still, no one intervened. Fairview wasn't the kind of town where people meddled, until it was too late. Pastor Michael Crane was next. He looked exhausted when the detective met him at the church office, his Bible open but unread. He spoke in slow, deliberate tones, saying he'd last seen Julia days before her death during a counseling session. When asked if he'd visited her home recently, he hesitated for just a second too long. He denied any involvement, insisting his relationship with the couple was purely spiritual. Yet, the church's parking lot security camera revealed something damning. A silver sedan matching his was seen pulling up to the Bensons' house the night before Julia's death, staying for less than half an hour. As the evidence mounted, so did the tension in Fairview. The congregation grew restless, whispering theories about forbidden affairs, blackmail, and jealousy. Detective Mendez could feel the weight of secrets pressing in from every direction. Julia's mother revealed that her daughter had been frightened recently, saying she'd discovered something that would change everything. But she never said what it was. That night, Mendez spread Julia's belongings across her desk. Her phone, a silver locket, the small bottle of wine found near the pool. Inside the locket was a photo of Julia and Aaron on their wedding day, smiling beneath the church archway, with Pastor Michael standing proudly behind them. Three faces forever frozen in happiness, each now bound by betrayal and death. As the detective stared at that picture, she realized that the answer wasn't hidden in the obvious clues. It was buried beneath the perfect image the three had built for the world. And if the rumors were true, if Julia had really caught the two men in something unspeakable, then her death wasn't just a crime of passion. It was an act of silence, crafted by someone desperate to erase the truth before it destroyed them both. The deeper Detective Mendez dug, the darker the truth became. Fairview was no longer whispering, it was buzzing with speculation. Every corner of the town carried pieces of the story, twisted and retold until the facts blurred with fiction. But Mendez was focused on evidence, not rumors. She retraced every movement of the two men Julia had trusted most, and soon the hidden connection between them began to unravel like a knot that had been waiting to come undone. It started with a single email found on Aaron Benson's laptop. The subject line read, "If we need to talk, she knows." It had been sent to an encrypted address linked to Pastor Michael's phone. The timestamp was only 6 hours before Julia's estimated time of death. That email changed everything. Whatever Julia had discovered, it wasn't something the two men could let reach the light of day. As Detective Mendez dug through the pastor's financial records, she found irregular withdrawals, large sums of money disappearing in small increments over several months. The funds were traced to a secret account in Aaron's name. It wasn't money from counseling sessions or church donations. It was hush money, paid in quiet desperation to keep something buried. Julia must have found out about it, and once she did, she became a threat. Witness statements began to align in disturbing ways. One neighbor mentioned seeing a tall man in a dark jacket leaving the Bensons' house around midnight, moving quickly toward a silver car. Another said she heard raised voices followed by a sharp sound, like glass shattering. Mendez cross-referenced the details and realized the timeline placed both men in the vicinity of Julia's home the night she died. The affair between Aaron and Pastor Michael had started nearly a year earlier, during one of the pastor's late-night counseling visits. It began as emotional support, a bond over shared loneliness, but soon it crossed boundaries neither of them could control. Aaron, torn between guilt and desire, had confided everything to Julia's closest friend months before, an admission that would later serve as crucial testimony. Julia's discovery of the affair wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a threat to the pastor's career, his marriage, and his standing in the church. The image of moral perfection he had built over the years would crumble overnight if the truth came out. On the night of her death, Julia and Aaron had argued for hours. The autopsy revealed faint bruises on her wrist, consistent with someone grabbing her forcefully. There were traces of red wine on the patio floor, a shattered glass beneath a bush, and fingerprints belonging to both men on the bottle. Mendez pieced together the sequence. Julia had been drugged with sleeping pills mixed in her wine, possibly during an attempt to calm her down. But once she lost consciousness, the situation turned sinister. By the time the men realized what had happened, Julia was unresponsive. Panic must have set in. To protect their secret, they staged the scene to look like a suicide. One of them carried her to the pool, letting the water conceal their crime beneath its still surface. But secrets rarely stay buried forever. when the forensic team matched the partial fingerprints on the wine bottle to Pastor Michael. The image of the pious man collapsed. He was no longer the holy leader of Grace Fellowship Church. He was now a suspect in a murder. Detective Mendez stood in the evidence room staring at the glass, realizing she was holding the object that tied every thread together. The same bottle of wine that symbolized Julia's final attempt to move on had become the instrument of her silence. And now, the walls around the two men who had shared that secret night were beginning to close in. When the truth finally began to surface, the entire town of Fairview felt as if it was holding its breath. The quiet suburban streets that once echoed with church bells now buzzed with reporters, curious neighbors, and angry parishioners demanding answers. Pastor Michael Crane, the man who had once preached about honesty and redemption, was now being escorted into a police car under flashing red and blue lights. Aaron Benson, pale and trembling, followed closely behind, his head lowered as if already mourning his fate. The investigation that had started with whispers and doubt was about to explode into a scandal that would destroy lives and faith alike. Detective Mendez sat across from Aaron in the interrogation room, the air thick with tension. He looked exhausted, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. At first, he maintained his innocence, insisting Julia's death had been an accident. He said she was unstable, that she'd taken sleeping pills on her own after their argument. But when Mendez placed the photo of the wine bottle on the table, the one with both his and the pastor's fingerprints, his entire body went still. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then, slowly, he began to talk. Aaron admitted there had been an argument. He said Julia had discovered everything, the affair, the money, the lies, and she had threatened to expose them both to the congregation. Michael had come over that night to try to calm her down, to convince her not to ruin their lives. According to Aaron, the confrontation turned heated. Julia had been drinking, emotions boiling, shouting that she would go to the police the next morning. That's when, he claimed, Michael reached for her glass of wine and quietly poured in the sleeping pills. Aaron said he didn't stop him. He just stood there, frozen, as Julia grew dizzy and collapsed onto the chair. When Detective Mendez later interviewed Pastor Michael, the story changed. Michael claimed that by the time he arrived, Julia was already unconscious. Aaron, he said, had called him in a panic, begging for help. He told the detective that when he saw her motionless body, Aaron insisted she had overdosed. Terrified of being blamed, the two men decided to stage it as a suicide. They placed her body in the pool, thinking the water would wash away any evidence, but they hadn't counted on the sleeping medication still being traceable in her system, or the forensic evidence tying them both to the scene. The trial that followed captivated the nation. The courtroom overflowed with journalists and townspeople. The image of Pastor Michael standing before the jury, no longer a man of God but a man exposed, became the symbol of Fairview's lost innocence. Aaron cried through most of the proceedings, his guilt weighing visibly heavier each day. Both men blamed each other, their friendship disintegrating in public view. In the end, the jury found them both guilty of manslaughter, concluding that while neither had planned to kill Julia, their actions and cover-up had caused her death. Grace Fellowship Church closed its doors soon after. The building, once filled with hymns and sermons, stood empty, its stained glass windows dark and dusty. The house where Julia had lived was eventually sold, though neighbors said no one stayed there long. They spoke of strange ripples appearing in the pool at night, faint splashes when the wind was still, as if the water itself remembered what had happened. Detective Mendez moved on to other cases, but Julia Benson's face stayed with her. It wasn't just another file in a drawer. It was a reminder of how lies and shame could twist love into something deadly. In Fairview, people still talk about the woman who saw too much, about the secret that killed her, and about how even in a town built on faith, sin had found a way to disguise itself in the pulpit.